What's going on, everybody? I'm Johnny Brook. Welcome back to another Crafted Workshop video. Today I'm here at the Skiatook Adventure here just north of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Been out here all weekend hanging out with the guys from the Crafted podcast, building this plywood bench or coffee table. You can kind of use it for whatever you want. A really simple project. We kind of built it with all cordless mobile tools, so really simple and basic, easy to build, and only used one sheet of plywood. So hopefully you enjoy. Let's go ahead and get started.
So as I said, this project's built with one sheet of 3/4 inch plywood. I used a nicer birch plywood from my local home center, and I definitely recommend trying to find something with a nice looking veneer. The more expensive plywood will also probably have less voids or holes between the layers of the plywood, and this will just make the top look better. So I had my home center break the 4-foot by 8-foot sheet of plywood into 4 2-foot by 4-foot pieces, and then started ripping these pieces into 2-inch strips on the table saw. If you don't have a table saw, you could definitely use a circular saw with an edge guide attachment to rip these strips just as easily. So I built this project with James Wright and Zach Herberholz, my two co-hosts on our podcast, the Crafted Podcast, and we built this during the Skiatook Adventure Video Woodworkers event in Skiatook, Oklahoma. We all had a great time over the weekend. There were a ton of other awesome YouTube woodworkers there building stuff, including Jay Bates, Nick Ferry, Jimmy DeResta, Sean Stone, Woodbrew, and a ton of others. I definitely recommend trying to make it out next year in case you missed this year's event. It was just a ton of fun. Alright, let's get back to the build. So once I'd ripped all the pieces into 2-inch strips, I started cutting them to length on the miter saw. So I designed this table to basically create box joints or finger joints during the glue up, and this creates a really strong joint between the legs and top with no fancy work required. To do this, I cut every other strip for the top to 4 inches shorter than the strip next to it, and I also did the same thing for the leg pieces, cutting every other piece shorter. So I have detailed plans available for this project that have exact measurements if you want to build this for yourself, and those will be linked to in the video description below. I used a stop block on the miter saw stand to make sure all the pieces were the same length, and this really sped up the process. I definitely recommend doing this just to keep everything nice and aligned. So with all the pieces cut, we could start in on the glue up. This was a pretty simple glue up. We just needed to make sure the first layer was square, and as long as we lined up each layer after that, the table would end up square. So to start, we laid out one layer with a short top piece and 2 long leg pieces. I applied glue, and then we laid on the next layer with a long top piece and 2 short leg pieces. These staggered pieces are where the strength comes from in the joint, as there's a ton of glue surface created by staggering the pieces. If you're having trouble understanding this, just slow down the video here and I think you'll get it. I just kept stacking the layers, adding glue in between each layer and using brad nails to keep the pieces from slipping around. If you don't have a brad nailer, you could also use screws to hold the layers together during the glue up. Once I had all the layers glued and nailed into place, we added clamps just to try and remove any gaps. While the glue dried, James also filled the voids in the top with epoxy, and this just gives you a nice, clean, smooth top surface. Once the glue and epoxy dried, we got to work flattening the top and sides. No matter how careful you are during the glue up, you're still going to have some kind of uneven edges, and you're going to have to flatten it in some way. So we used a combination of an electric planer and hand plane. But if you don't have those tools, you could also use a belt sander and get similar results. Next, we trimmed the legs square using a circular saw and square. We also chamfered all the edges with a block plane. Before finishing, I sanded all the surfaces up to 220 grit using a random orbit sander, and then we all signed the bottom of the piece just to signify when it was built. For the finish, I applied 3 coats of a wipe-on polyurethane, and the edge grain of this plywood soaked up a ton of finish, and I used an entire quart of finish on this one table. Just keep that in mind, you'll definitely need plenty of finish for this project. And once the finish dried, the coffee table was done.
All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. Thanks so much for watching. I will have plans available for these on my website if you want to check those out. Also, if you don't already, go ahead and get subscribed. I put out new project videos like this every Tuesday. I also have links to all the products and tools I use in the video description below. And last, I want to say a big shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much for the support. If you guys want to check that out, I'll also have a link to my Patreon page as well. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and until next time, happy building.